And I think that I just have to respectfully go, have a good life.
Everything changed long before the cameras caught it, long before interviews, public statements, and shocking confessions. The truth is, the downfall didn't start with a dramatic fight or some big scandal. It started with just one move, one decision that, on the surface, looked harmless while quietly planting seeds of division which eventually tore the whole family apart. That move, the one everybody thought would fix everything, ended up exposing every hidden crack, every buried resentment, every secret that no one had dared to speak out loud. It started, in many ways, with the idea of a new beginning. After years of growing tension, emotional distance, and silent battles, it was clear to the family that a change in place would give them clarity. They felt that they would rebuild lost trust, strengthen relationships, and finally be free from the years of building pressure. Almost immediately after, signs were everywhere. The excitement everyone tried to show on camera masked something nobody wanted to admit. Deep down, every single person felt fear, uncertainty, and a quiet sense that this new chapter wasn't about to unfold the way they had hoped. It felt off from the moment the packing started. What should have been a cooperative effort quickly turned emotional into a tug of war. Some members of the family welcomed the idea of change, naming it the chance to reset their lives. Others felt forced, unheard, or even pressured to fake their agreement with the idea. And in that emotional chaos, the cracks appeared. Small disagreements started turning into tense moments. Simple decisions about sorting belongings, choosing travel dates, and deciding who would handle which responsibilities became arguments that showed just how disconnected everyone already was. But the real problem wasn't the move in itself, it was what the move exposed. During all those years, the family had been operating just like that carefully painted picture, bright on the outside, but with serious imperfections beneath. When their routine shifted and when the familiar environment disappeared, so did any ability to camouflage those cracks. Suddenly, everything they had been able to avoid, everything they had brushed aside, started bubbling to the surface. The emotional pressure kept mounting with the approaching moving day. The family was already at a stretched condition due to financial strain, and this relocation increased it further. Opportunities, better living, more stability, the promises continued, but deep inside, not everyone believed them. Silent doubts became frustration, unsaid fears turned into resentment, and everybody started interpreting the situation in one's own way, some filled with hope, others with feelings of betrayal. On the actual day of the move, the tension was almost impossible to ignore. What should have been a united forward leap felt more like a forced march. Confused by the swirl of mixed emotions around them, some children were excited to leave old memories behind, while others were heartbroken, having to leave lifelong friendships, routines, and the only sense of home they had ever known. Their reactions varied dramatically: tears in one corner, nervous smiles in another, and blank stares in between. The adults were faring no better. Some were trying to remain optimistic, repeating encouraging words, forcing excitement, and saying it would get better once we settle in. But behind those hopeful words was stress, deep, painful stress. To some, the move symbolized losing the last bit of control they once had in the family, while to others, it represented a desperate attempt to save something already slipping away. Once they finally reached the location, the strain did not let up, but rather intensified. The reality hit immediately. The living situation was nothing like they had envisioned it. Promised timelines were not met, while the housing arrangements were complicated, unprepared, and uncomfortable. Changes needed to occur quicker than people were prepared for, and such instability created emotional chaos. As everyone was scattered, unsettled, and overwhelmed, all communication broke down. Suddenly, every disagreement that had been ignored for years started resurfacing. Minor concerns blew up into heated discussions. A simple comment could trigger an argument. Every person felt unheard in his or her own way, and nobody knew how to bridge the divide. What was supposed to be a hopeful new beginning became a magnifying glass on every wound the family never healed. Then came the new evidence, details that showed the real reason the downfall began. The evidence wasn't just a piece of paper or a confession, it was a pattern. Messages, conversations, and recollections surfaced, showing how some promises made before the move never matched the reality afterward. Some family members began realizing they had been persuaded into the relocation using hopes that were never going to be fulfilled. Others found out the move wasn't a joint decision at all. It had been pushed through by only a few, leaving the rest to deal with the consequences. As weeks went by, the family dynamics changed drastically. Alliances formed, trust broke apart, and people who once depended on each other emotionally began pulling away, choosing privacy over confrontation. Some felt abandoned, while others felt blamed for things they never chose. The move that was supposed to unite them had instead forced everyone into emotional corners they didn't know how to escape. At this point, the relationships were stretched thin. The pressure, the disappointment, the constant instability, all of it began turning into resentment. Conversations shortened, tension was normal, and the more everyone tried moving forward, the more they realized damage had already been done. The move didn't just displace the family physically, it changed their emotional access. Everything that had been considered and trusted was questioned now, reevaluating promises that no longer mattered, facing a truth they'd all tried to avoid for decades. And that is when the fall truly began, beginning not with one action, but rather with a chain reaction of feelings, miscommunication, and unresolved issues finally forced out into the open by the move. This new evidence now confirms what the family never wanted to admit. The downfall started the very moment they felt relocating would solve problems they never had. And with each passing day, the consequences of that decision only grew heavier, dragging the family deeper into the storm that would soon change everything forever. As the Brown family settled into the new home, tensions that had been simmering for years began to surface more visibly. The Flagstaff move, initially framed as a fresh start for the family, quickly revealed cracks that nobody had anticipated. Cody's authority, which had previously gone largely unquestioned, faced subtle yet undeniable challenges from the wives who were beginning to see the effects of relocation on their children and their own lives. Christine, in particular, noticed how the move was disrupting routines essential to her children's well-being. She saw the unease on her children's faces each morning, subtle expressions of frustration, confusion, and anxiety they couldn't put words into. These signs weighed heavily on her and, in some ways, planted seeds of concern about the long-term ramifications of this forced change. Meanwhile, Miri noticed how Cody's decisions increasingly favored his ambitions over the emotional well-being of the family. She tried to raise her concerns, only to find herself repeatedly dismissed, often using rationales that made little or no sense and appeared intended primarily to control rather than understand. Janelle, playing mediator, tried to bridge the increasing gap separating Cody from the rest of the family. She tried to encourage not just dialogue, but a collective expression of their feelings, in hopes of reaching a semblance of compromise. Yet, the more rigid Cody's responses became, the more his vision for the family's future was apparently about consolidating control rather than addressing genuine needs. Robin, the newest wife, also felt the pressure of the relocation. While she publicly supported Cody's decisions, in private, she struggled with the fact that this move had caused tension within her children and her relationships with the others. The family unity in the new environment emphasized the cracks that had been hidden for years. Family dinners that once served as bonding moments became stressful situations. Conversations, once flowing naturally, were changed to silences, awkward exchanges, or sharp rebuttals. The children, sensitive to the dynamics of the home, started to show their own forms of unrest. Aurora and Garrison, especially, were confused and frustrated, asking what was wrong with moving and why Mom and Dad weren't on the same page anymore. Their innocence and vulnerability made it hard for the wives to turn a blind eye to the ramifications of Cody's decisions. These moments started becoming tough for Christine and Janelle, who felt an urgent need to protect their kids while at the same time keeping family unity intact. Adding to this tension was the financial strain that came with the movement of several households. Cody's ambitious projects and the need to create a new compound placed resources under stress that was not anticipated. The wives began to notice that promises of shared prosperity and stability were not materializing, but were instead bringing along logistical challenges, financial uncertainties, and emotional turmoil. As small disagreements spiraled into major conflicts, the sense of unity that was once there slowly eroded in the family. Christine began keeping a mental log of the family's experiences, moments of miscommunication, broken promises, and a multitude of ignored emotional needs. She knew that proof of how the move affected everyone would become significant later, not for her own understanding, but as evidence of the consequences of Cody's decisions. She became even more observant of patterns in how frequently Cody's actions left the family scrambling to adjust, how conflicts escalated when voices went unheard, and how the emotional state of the children changed directly due to the stress from the adults around them. Meanwhile, Miri quietly started having confidences with Christine and Janelle about her budding concerns and fears regarding the direction that the family was taking. Casual conversations transformed into strategic ones on how to cope and respond to Cody's increasingly authoritarian stance. The women exchanged insights, analyzed Cody's decisions, and probed for ways of protecting their children emotionally in a household increasingly dominated by tension. The dynamics in Flagstaff were proving that even the best laid schemes could fall by the wayside when communication started to break down. The initial euphoria of a new home had quickly transformed into a landscape of unresolved issues, quiet resentments, and subtle acts of defiance. The wives were learning it required vigilance, careful planning, and a willingness to stand firm when necessary for survival in this environment. Christine began to piece together the big picture. The relocation of homes was about control, influence, and power among family members. Every decision, every action, every word spoken held a certain significance, with the stakes much higher than anyone could have imagined. Her musings had deepened to include not just Cody's big plans, but also how those would affect the children and the subtle alliances that would form between wives. The stage was set for big changes. The Flagstaff move, meant to both unify and strengthen the family, had been proving to bring out vulnerabilities, test the loyalties of members, and expose fractures that could no longer be ignored. Christine, Janelle, and Miri were becoming increasingly aware that the decisions made in this season would have long-lasting consequences, not just for themselves, but for the Brown family legacy as a whole. As tensions escalated, Christine prepared herself for the inevitable battles ahead, knowing full well that the family could no longer continue as it had. She realized that at this point, it would be necessary to stand up not just for the children, but also for truth and fairness, even if it meant challenging Cody on a level she had never done before. The next steps she and the other wives were to take would define the trajectory of the family, making the Flagstaff move a moment that would live long in memory. As days turned into weeks in Flagstaff, the pressures of the new environment began to manifest in ways that were impossible to ignore. The wives, each dealing with their own struggles, started noticing patterns that suggested the move was less about opportunity and more about consolidating control. Christine, particularly, felt a heavy responsibility to observe not only the children, but also relationships among all members of the family. The stress was palpable, as minor disagreements tended to become heated with great rapidity, and the atmosphere of the household became increasingly tense. The reactions of the children spoke for themselves. Aurora, who was once lively and jolly, became withdrawn, silently witnessing the building conflicts with a sense of unease. Garrison showed frustration much more overtly, frequently clashing with his siblings and even the adults when emotions ran high. Christine realized that the emotional toll on the children was not simply a matter of adjustment. It was a direct result of decisions made by Cody that prioritized control over well-being. Each child's unique personality highlighted different aspects of the strain. Some internalized their feelings, while others expressed them through anger or rebellion. Meanwhile, Mary and Janelle quietly began strategizing ways to maintain a semblance of normalcy and protect their children. Their conversations, initially casual, grew more deliberate as they recognized the urgency in the situation. They discussed Cody's actions, the outcomes that might be produced by those actions, and possible avenues they could take to protect the emotional well-being and future security of their families. These discussions were not without tension themselves. Friction among the wives was created by differing opinions on how to react, but a shared concern for their children and an acknowledgement of the need to take action tied them together. Robin, behind her veneer of support for Cody, struggled with the move herself. While she kept up appearances of unity, she started to notice privately that the other wives were resentful and that subtle yet significant changes were happening with her own children. She was very aware that the move had changed routine, friendship patterns, and the security that children rely on. Trying to balance her loyalty to Cody with her concern for her own family raised the intensity level in the household even higher. Added to this were the financial pressures, transferring multiple households, maintaining the big properties, and sustaining ambitious projects, well-stretched resources. Where once discussions of family planning and logistics predominated, now budgets, debts, and the apportionment of expenditure were the order of the day. And the promise of prosperity that had underpinned the rationale of removal now seemed ever more remote. In Christine's view, as in that of her co-wives, the very material foundation upon which the family was established began to appear seriously undermined. As the wives watched these developments, it finally sank in that Cody's style of leadership was quite unbending, and his vision rarely accounted for practical realities and emotional needs. Instead, it catered to long-term goals and perceptions. When talking to him, he would either dismiss the conversations or always try to make sure he was in charge. It was then that the wives understood trying to express concerns directly would not work. Each had to reshape the way she approached the problem if her goal was to protect herself and her children. The time record Christine started, after which she made a note of the pattern of behavior, inconsistencies in Cody's statements, and how each decision was affecting the children. These were both personal and strategic observations. On one hand, Christine needed to be prepared for the unfolding situation by being able to make informed choices, and on the other hand, it may serve as evidence in case the dispute was taken to legal and public levels. Similarly, Janelle and Mary began compiling both mental and written records, realizing the need to keep track of events within the family since information could easily be distorted or dismissed. At the same time, the wives were interacting with each other. There were brief moments of collaboration and tension as the different views and emotional responses. Christine often ended up acting as a mediator between Mary and Janelle or offering calming interjections during heated discussions. Through it all, however, a sense of mutual solidarity grew. The wives realized that their collective well-being and that of their children depended upon mutual support and close coordination. Meanwhile, the dynamics with the extended family became more apparent. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances within the community began to observe warning signals. Whispers of discontent started circulating, and the reality between public semblances and private truth grew even more striking. Christine realized that the family's name, built over years of exposure, was now likely to be eclipsed by internal battles that worsened day by day. The pressure cooker that was Flagstaff revealed deeper truths about the relationships at the heart of this family. Loyalty, trust, and cooperation were all on trial, and the consequences of the trials would be long-lasting. Christine watched as authority, ambition, and family ties interacted and slowly came to realize that family cohesion was far more tenuous than anyone had let on. Every decision taken, every exchange, and every silence propelled them on a path from which there was no longer any going back. As the weeks rolled by, little acts of rebellion began to show up. Children resisted routines, wives challenged directives, and small disputes escalated into larger confrontations. The move, which was supposed to have been a fresh start, was instead exposing weaknesses and showing clearly the effects of decisions made without reevaluation of any kind. Christine was now more determined than ever, working out in her mind ways to proactively address these emerging issues, realizing that doing nothing would carry grave consequences for the future of the family. By the end of this period, it was clear that Flagstaff would not be a simple chapter in family history. It was a turning point, a crucible that would reveal true loyalties, test emotional endurance, and force critical decisions that could redefine relationships forever. Christine, standing at the center of these dynamics, knew the coming months would be pivotal. Every observation, every choice, and every calculated move would play a role in shaping the family's legacy. The tension in Flagstaff was palpable, with the daily routines increasingly unpredictable. Small disagreements blew up into arguments, and the atmosphere in the home became increasingly volatile. Christine, observant as ever, started to pick out patterns in Cody's behavior that explained a lot about his motives for this move. How he presented an air of control and authority, yet small slips showed that the relocation had been driven less by practicality and more by personal interests that favored some members of the family over others. The children, sensitive to the changed dynamics, acted out in a myriad of ways. Some retreated into their rooms for hours on end, while others confronted their parents directly and asked anguished questions about decisions that uprooted their lives. Christine felt the burden of responsibility to mediate these conflicts and guide the family through with reassurances, all while she herself navigated tangles of frustration. She realized that the family's emotional stability was dependent not just on rules and structure, but on open communication and empathy. Miri and Janelle, seeing the growing unrest, increased their efforts to support the children and maintain a sense of normalcy. They worked together to create routines and safe spaces where the kids could express themselves freely. Yet, the underlying tension between the wives themselves sometimes created friction, as differing opinions on strategy and priorities came to the forefront. These moments of conflict were telling. They revealed the delicate balance required to manage not only the children's well-being, but also interpersonal relationships among the adults. Eventually, money pressure became the other overpowering influence. The various households, vast property upkeep, and myriad family projects presented a financial stressor at all times. Christine noticed that behind much of Cody's lofty ideas was often buried an obvious reality for the sake of holding the family together. Money clashes also became more frequent and sharp, which further worsened the stability in the family environment. Robin, though aligned with Cody on the surface, started to quietly assess the impact of the move on her own children. She realized the slight but powerful effects of stress, disrupted routines, and emotional tension. Though she put on a united front, her inner battles raged as loyalties were called into question, being loyal to Cody while worried about her children's well-being. These internal conflicts reflected larger issues that plagued the family as a whole and emphasized just how difficult it was to navigate these relationships in an intricate and highly pressurized setting. Christine, with a growing concern for long-term ramifications, began to keep detailed incident reports. Each argument, each pattern of behavior, and every decision that went against the children or against the welfare of the house was noted. She knew that these records would be important for her own clarity as well as for future legal or public considerations. Miri and Janelle did the same, compiling a cumulative understanding of the issues that had developed and brainstorming ways to best address them. In such a situation, family communication became a two-edged sword. Some discussions allowed for solving problems and clarity, while others turned into blame, defensiveness, and misunderstanding. Christine often acted as a mediator, involving herself in sensitive conversations to prevent escalation. Such a role was exhausting but needed since she realized that long-term family health depended on the ability to manage conflict without letting it spiral out of control. Extended family and community did not long remain exempt from evidencing the strain. Friends, relatives, and neighbors picked up on the subtle cues, irritation, tension, and disconnection that suggested all was not well behind the public facade. Christine keenly perceived the potential risk that years of highly publicized effort to establish just the right family image would now be jeopardized if these tensions became common knowledge. The pressure to maintain appearances added another layer of stress to the already challenging dynamics within the household. As the tension mounted, pockets of rebellion began to form. Children challenged the rules, some wives began to question Cody's edicts, and petty squabbles betrayed underlying currents of resentment. Christine watched it all happen and knew the family had reached a junction. The Flagstaff relocation, supposed to start over, had exposed weaknesses and invited new ones that required tactical attention. Christine's observations became the cornerstone for her strategic approach. She analyzed each incident, speculated on what might follow, and started making plans that would ensure the security of the children, maintain stability, and avoid confrontations whenever possible. It was this long-term view, rather than frustration over any immediate setbacks, that made her the household's stabilizing force. Careful attention to detail, along with the will to take controlled action, positioned her as a key figure in managing the family's challenges. These accumulated tensions foretold anything but a tranquil way ahead for the family. Christine realized decisions and course of actions made in the weeks and months ahead would dictate relationships, affect emotional wellness, and identify the integrity of the family unit. The stakes were high, and every action, every conversation, and every decision carried significant weight. The Flagstaff move, intended to strengthen the family, had instead revealed fault lines that would test the resilience, loyalty, and ingenuity of every member. As the days wore on, tension hung in the air without revelation. Every member had a different kind of battle they were fighting, and the dynamics caused by the push and pull of authority, ambition, and emotional needs formed a tight web. Christine watched intently, knowing well that grasping this dynamic was the only way to lead the family through the turmoil. The decisions made would last, and strategic movement, keen observation, and relentless focus seemed never as necessary as now. As days in Flagstaff turned increasingly tense, the boiling point was reached inside the household. Christine became a keen observer as Cody's choices continued to ripple unrest in every other person around him, unrest that didn't appear able to be tamed. Arguments flared over seeming trivial things, but each disagreement held deeper, unresolved matters that had festered for a long period of time. Christine knew that the move, which had been presented as a new beginning, had instead unveiled fractures in the family's foundation and exposed vulnerabilities no one could ignore. The reactions of the children became impossible to ignore. Some struggled silently, turning inward as if for protection from the storm, while others confronted their parents directly with anger, confusion, and heartbreak. Christine, as both a mother and a stabilizing presence, felt an immense responsibility for guiding them through this emotional minefield. Every word, every action mattered, as the consequences of missteps were immediately evident. She had started keeping detailed notes of each incident in the realization that the documentation could serve both as a personal record and as a safeguard for the children's well-being. Mary and Janelle were also equally dramatized by the rising tension and doubled their efforts to keep order and show emotional support. While different, each of their methods had the same goal in mind: taking care of the children and trying to diminish the chaos that had overcome the household. They started working more together, making a subtle alliance to counterbalance Cody's unpredictability. Christine knew this was important. Unity among the wives was key to survival in an increasingly precarious environment. Financial strain had also become a constant source of conflict. The costs of maintaining multiple households, property, and funding the various family endeavors weighed heavily on everyone. Arguments about money became more frequent, and Christine noticed that Cody's focus on grand projects often ignored the practical implications for the family's day-to-day life. Robin, while outwardly supportive of Cody, began quietly evaluating how these decisions affected her own children, highlighting the internal conflicts that mirrored the larger familial issues. At first, it was just hairline fissures in Cody's authority. Children started fighting the rules, wives challenged his decisions, and those moments of outright defiance began to crop up that bespoke a budding resistance. Christine watched this with interest, knowing full well that her family had reached a tipping point at which decisions now would determine whether stability could be regained or further collapse was inevitable. She planned how she could protect the children, mediate conflicts, and bring some semblance of order to chaos. Another immediate concern was the public image of the family. Neighbors, friends, and relatives had started to feel the tensions, which, of course, created questions and doubts about this idealistic scenario of familial harmony. Christine realized that what was at stake was not just the personal relationships, but also the family's reputation. Every interaction had its repercussions, and the burden to maintain appearances added another layer of complexity to an already fragile situation. It was during this turmoil that Christine began to discover the hidden motives and unspoken agendas that had dictated Cody's actions. His insistence upon his move to Flagstaff, once framed as practical or necessary, was actually deeply personal interests that uplifted some family members while diminishing others. It was sobering to finally grasp this. Fully revealed, such truths could change the dynamic of the family forever. It all came to a head one evening during a family meeting. Voices rose, accusations started flying, and the fragile peace of the household shattered under the weight of pent-up frustration and unspoken grievances. Christine remained calm despite the barrage of emotion that weighed heavily upon her, and carefully used her observations to navigate the confrontation. She knew this could be the moment that would prove to be either the turning point to rebuild trust and communication, or the catalyst for irreversible division. As the night wore on, there came a time when something had to be done. Christine and the other wives weighed their options carefully, the consequences of action versus inaction. Every choice carried significant weight, and the stakes were higher than ever. The future of the family hung in the balance, and the coming days promised to test loyalty, resilience, and the strength of familial bonds like never before. Just when it seemed it was time for a semblance of calm to settle in, Christine received a message that would alter everything. A revelation about Cody's true intentions and long-hidden actions came to light, threatening to expose secrets that could redefine the family forever. Christine knew that the next steps would set her path and the future for every member of the family. The scene ended in heavy silence, as each waited, aware that the consequences of this unfolding truth were beyond imagination. The move to Flagstaff, meant to begin a new chapter, had instead unraveled truths that could shatter everything. Christine's next move, the alliances she would form, and the decisions she would take were about to reveal the real story behind the family's struggles, and the world was about to see what had truly been happening behind closed doors.